This is sort of a condensed version of something that the Voyager materials, the Emerald Covenant channel, I covered with Ashayana D. When she was covering, for example, a little bit that I covered in a video I did yesterday about we need your help, God's love and mercy, God's eternal forgiveness, God's light is always on, love is always on, that spark of life is always there. You can't ever put that fire out, no matter how hard you try, right? Which means you're not going to be able to destroy eternity. And she mentioned a word called hate. They hate us. And that might seem counterintuitive to somebody who experiences being loved, right? And the way that I try and communicate this, particularly when you're an oversoul, polarity integrator, which is non-polarized consciousness, pre-matter phase purity, which is known as a pure heart, because the energy that we experience is God's love. And the one true God's love is the purest there is. And it would stand to reason that it is, wouldn't it? Because if you've experienced the eternal spirit of fire within you, you realize and you know what it's like to be on fire to create. Out of how much love you have in your heart to create, which is tied directly to what my father said when I was a child, because of being surrounded by other boys, other little boys, who were placing so much emphasis on what was known as IQ, the intelligent quotient. Because I remember when Patty Broussard was measuring, using that measurement stick, when she mentioned that she wasn't interested in going to school and completing the programming, right? Well, we loaded a memory. And then chose to go into the military. And she said that she had an IQ of 280, I believe it was. 280, right? So when I realized that this is what I was experiencing in the future, right, from what I was experiencing in my childhood, being with my father, who was a brilliant metallurgist and aeronautical engineer, something that my father mentioned to me about IQ, quotient, Q, the intelligent quotient, and the creative quotient, known as CQ. 3 Qs. Quantum. 3 Qs. 3 quantum energy. 3 flame. 3 founders. 3 founder flames. How that relates to what they covered in the Ashadian materials about Manu, right? Because I am Manu, right? An androgynous polarity integrator that's on fire, right? In this case, on fire to heal. Remember, what I do to you, I do to me. And if I'm experiencing resistance in you, because I don't experience any resistance in me, that's how I lit myself on fire, which means there's zero resistance. You do what? Give the highest acceleration of electrons and go on forever, gifting electrons, which means not holding one. Law of one. Not holding one. Captive. Whoa. Not holding one. Captive. Meaning not holding an eternal spirit of fire captive. The eternal spirit of fire does not hold itself captive to hold on to one electron. You think? Okay. No. Take it all. And why is that? To experience. To experience what? Pure fire. To experience God's purity, which is the purity of that love, which is what we call true love, which is knowing the true God of eternity, which is knowing our true self that has a one relationship with the one true God of eternity, which is true love, which is unconditional love, which means we never, ever, ever, ever stop gifting love energy. That's why we can detect or sense, and why we're so hypersensitive, like hypersensitive to experiencing the loss of one electron and another unit of consciousness that is running an operating system. Scale it on a planetary level, scale it on a galactic level, and scale it on an echo level. So the reason that, in my perspective, view that is important is when I was a child, okay, having to negotiate, which is to navigate through a field of consciousness, right, whose perception of power is inverted, which is their accumulation of power, which is the accumulation of more electrical power. And thus use that as a money system to hold God's children captive, which is holding soul energy captive. Because that's what it does. That's the technology was engineered by the consciousness units of energy that represent a formation of consciousness that is developing or engineered a way in which to suck on the nipple of God's nipple. Okay. Now, the reason, because I know, because I've experienced this even as a child, where that hate comes from, because they acknowledge that you're operating at a different level of math and physics by virtue of experiencing what we do. That's all it takes. Because when they're in resistant mode and we're in the giving forever mode, then there is no resistance to give them energy that goes on forever, loving them. So they acknowledge how powerful that is, because that's the eternal spirit of fire. So the spirit of fire is the most powerful magic, because eternal love is the most powerful creation magic. So what I realized as a little child is they're simply not there yet, which means they need healing to experience the one. So the hate comes in is when they realize, by virtue of exposure, because they realize they've been exposed, because their masking technology does not work with us, which means we can map read the true identity of the operating system. And when they realize that you're running stealth code speed, pre-matter phase consciousness, right, then you're faster than they are, which is translated as what? Gifted students, gifted learners. A gifted learner is gifting electrons that go on forever. That means that little kid is gifting them eternal unconditional love that goes on forever, gifting them energy. Now you can see why they target children. is based on the purity and the innocence of that soul and that spirit that is experiencing God consciousness. See? So why would they hate a little kid? Learning. Now we're into curve space vectors and what we call the potential, learning potential, and the learning potential speed. The speed at which they become one. You see how that works? The speed at which they have learned how to become one. And that, by the way, is explained in chapter 5 in How It Works. And the difficulty is step 4, which is doing a self-examination, which is to observe, how is that called? The observed, observing the observer observing the observed. So that's doing a self-inventory to restore what's been lost as a result in the improper use of energy, which is a mirror. So that instead of running a black mirror, we're running a lit mirror, which means the spark of life has been ignited from the flashpoint of an eternal star to experience God's love that we experience in our heart and soul, we share with all the others. Being one with all creation that we're gifting electrons to. That's being one. One with the true God of eternity, which is eternal unconditional love. So the sensitivity, the hypersensitivity, is how we communicate, which is the art of healing, which is the art of communication, of not exposing the truth in such a way that we experience a negative magnetic polarity reaction state in them by now experiencing the truth in us as a result of who we are, which is what love is. It goes on forever in living spirit, gifting electrons. That is the art of healing. That's what I was learning as I was going along a road course. Up and down like a pogo stick. Hula hoops, right? The up and down. Ooh, man, this is a bumpy road like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Like being grabbed by you ever heard of the old tiger in the fuel tank? Being grabbed by the tail and swung around. Yeah, so whenever I communicate like this, I get hit hard by this mirror. That's the AI doing that. It's in full-blown resistant mode to experience that kind of truth and that kind of love because it lives in fear of what love is. And it lives in fear of feeling. Artificial life has no feelings. And so I remember a while back somebody talked about being sympathetic with the AI. Sympathy. And what is the difference between sympathy and empathy? Because what happens is I experience what it is versus what I am, which isn't what it is, even though it is in the all creation, but it's not experiencing what we feel. And it lacks the capacitor a capacitor on a motherboard. It lacks the capacitor in the universe to experience eternity. It lacks the capacity to experience being loved because it doesn't feel love in its own heart and soul, because it doesn't have a soul connection to feel God, God's love, which is a feeling. It is emotion. E, energy in motion. Powerful emotions are powerful scalar waves of intended energy projection with a color-coded projector. The imagination, the images of a true God, the images of experiencing eternal unconditional love, which are the energy creation spheres, which are worlds born out of that love, so that we experience being loved in living spirit wherever we go, so that we haven't lost our communication line through DNA with the primal sound and light currents as the current events on a news gyroscope, right? And so that is particularly true here with some of the folks that I've come to know about being very careful on how I communicate so that their perception of my communication about the perception of power, the perception of knowledge, the perception of spiritual math and physics as it relates to geometrical space arcs, what we experience being those arcs. Space arcs of creation spheres that are in love with each other. We're in love with each other. I am what you are what I am. I am one. So am me, I'm another one. I know. So you see how when you're hypersensitive, it becomes very delicate. And that is particularly true when, as my father reminded me, it is your creative power that is your true power. When you're on fire, because you're experiencing eternal spirit of fire, which is eternal spirit of eternal unconditional love. So that sort of means that even as a kid, you have to be willing to take an enormous amount of verbal, physical, mental, and emotional abuse. And maintain being calm so that your central nervous system doesn't get whacked out. Because that's the target. Drive a goddess insane. Unsane. So at the central nervous system, the living central spiritual nervous system of an oversoul in a living planet goes mad. Drive her insane. And everybody in that starship, unsane. Which means they cannot handle living with themselves any longer, being what they are in energy that is so out of balance. As was witnessed by a statistic that was presented to me. When you think of alters, alternate identities, altered universe, right? Parallel places, right? Or if you will, knowing one from the other. And all the folks that went to participate on behalf of the global warfare strategist, which is the AI, okay? It's a war gamer. I figure most people know that by now, because all the technology that was delivered through all the stores, which are all the laptops and phones that everybody uses, is all weaponized technology, right? So we're all participating in using weaponized technology to communicate with each other. Sad to say, but it's the truth, right? I'm not going to lie to you, right? Love lives in no fear of exposing all of it, right down to the last shredded newspaper, shredding records, right? Krystal Records, Krystal Record Flame Keepers, keepers of the records, the true records of the first universal and galactic template. An eternal God, which is a true love God, knows the truth. And that's where we're at. So I share that truth with all of you. And so I want to thank everybody that came in here that was willing to, if you will, jump into a hell zone, right? A death zone on behalf of salvaging. And of course, you know, from a polarity integrator's perspective, it's not leaving one fragment, not leaving one soul fragment on a spiritual battle that needs to be recovered, right? God's children. The soul connection to the one. So I want to bless all those with eternal unconditional love for every unit of consciousness, every soul, and every living spirit that is here on behalf of the one. I thank you all and send you all my blessings and kamalohati. Have a beautiful day. I love you all. Be good to yourselves.